It was supposed to be the perfect spring break getaway. Sarah and her friends had been planning for months to take a trip to a secluded beach house, hidden away in the woods, far from the crowds and chaos of the typical spring break destinations. They had heard that the house was haunted, but they laughed it off as just a silly rumor. After all, what could be scarier than a ghost story? As soon as they arrived, they knew something was off. The house was old, creaky, and smelled of musty books, but they were young and carefree, and they were determined to make the most of their vacation. They spent their days lounging on the beach, drinking beer and playing volleyball, and their nights were filled with laughter and wild parties. But as the week went on, strange things began to happen. Objects would move on their own, doors would open and close on their own, and they could hear strange whispers in the middle of the night. They tried to brush it off as just their imagination, but they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being surveilled. One night, after a particularly wild party, Sarah decided to take a walk on the beach to clear her head. She walked for a while, enjoying the sound of the waves crashing against the shore, when she saw something in the distance. It was a figure, dressed in black, standing at the edge of the woods. At first, she thought it was just one of her friends, but as she got closer, she realized it was something much more sinister. The figure was tall, thin, and had a pale, ghostly complexion. It was staring right at her, its eyes glowing in the darkness. Sarah tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She was paralyzed with fear. The figure started to move towards her, slowly but steadily, until it was right in front of her. Its mouth opened, but no sound came out. It reached out with its bony hand, and Sarah felt a cold, clammy grip on her arm. She tried to pull away, but the figure held on tight. Just as she thought it was all over, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving Sarah alone on the beach, shaken and terrified. The next day, Sarah told her friends, and they decided to investigate the strange occurrences in the house. They searched the attic, the basement, and every nook and cranny, but they found nothing. Just as they were about to give up, they found a hidden door leading to a secret room. Inside the room, they found an old journal, written by the previous owner of the house. It was filled with strange, cryptic entries about the supernatural, and a warning to stay away from the house during the spring equinox. They realized with horror that they had arrived during this time of the spring equinox. As they read on, they discovered that the house was built on top of an ancient burial ground, and the spirits of the dead were restless during the equinox. The spirits had been awakened by the loud music and wild parties, and they were now seeking revenge. Sarah and her friends tried to leave the house, but they found that they were trapped. The doors and windows were sealed shut, and the spirits were closing in. They could hear the whispers, the moans, and the eerie laughter of the dead as they descended upon the house. No one is really sure what happened when the spirits reached the house, but I'm guessing it wasn't pretty. Sarah and her friends were never seen again. The house was left abandoned, and the locals say that on the night of the spring equinox, you can still hear the sounds of laughter and music coming from deep within the woods. Some say that the spirits of Sarah and her friends are still trapped inside, reliving their last moments over and over again. Others say that the spirits have taken their revenge, and they are no longer restless. But one thing is for certain, the house is cursed, and anyone who dares to stay there during the spring equinox is doomed to meet the same fate as Sarah and her friends. Despite the warnings, there are still those who are drawn to the house, seeking adventure or thrills, but they never return. The locals say that the spirits have claimed yet another victim, and the house remains forever cursed. As for Sarah and her friends, their memory lives on, a cautionary tale for those who dare to seek out the unknown. They will never be forgotten, and their story will continue to haunt those who venture too close to the cursed beach house. And so, the legend of the haunted beach house lives on, a dark and foreboding presence in the hearts of those who know its tale. The spirits of the dead still linger, waiting for their next victim, and the beach remains a desolate and haunted place, forever lost in time. It was supposed to be the ultimate spring break vacation, a week of sun, sand, and partying in Cancun with her closest friends. But for 19-year-old college student Mia, it quickly turned into a nightmare. It started on the first night of their trip. Mia and her friends had gone in a nightclub to dance and have a few drinks. But as the night wore on, Mia started to feel uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She tried to ignore it and keep dancing, but then she saw him, a man standing across the room, staring at her with a cold, unfeeling gaze. He was older than the rest of the crowd, with a scruffy beard and a menacing aura. Mia tried to steer clear of him, but he seemed to be everywhere she went. He followed her to the bathroom, to the bar, and even onto the dance floor. She told her friends, but they didn't take her seriously. They thought she was just being paranoid. The next morning, Mia woke up in her hotel room with a pounding headache and a feeling of dread. She couldn't remember how she had gotten back to her room, but she knew something was wrong. She checked her phone, but it was dead. She went to the front desk to ask for help, but the receptionist didn't speak English. Mia was frustrated and scared, but she didn't know what else to do. She went back to her room and tried to charge her phone, but the outlet wasn't working. That's when she heard a knock on the door. She hesitated, but then she opened it, and there he was, the man from the nightclub. He pushed his way into her room and locked the door behind him. Mia screamed and fought, but he was too strong. He tied her up and gagged her, then threw her over his shoulder and carried her out of the room. She could hear her friends calling out for her, but it was too late. He took her to a secluded house on the outskirts of town. He kept her locked up in a dark room, barely feeding her and refusing to let her go. He said that he was going to sell her to the highest bidder, that he had been watching her ever since she got into town, and knew she was worth a fortune. As the days passed, and Mia began to lose hope, she knew her friends were looking for her, but she didn't know how long she could hold on. Then, one day she heard a commotion outside the door. She tried to scream, but the gag muffled her voice. But then she heard a familiar voice, her best friend Rachel. The man had left the door unlocked, and Rachel had found her from her iPhone location. Mia was weak and disoriented, but Rachel helped her up and led her outside. They ran as fast as they could, not stopping until they reached the police station. Mia was safe, but she was never the same. She returned home, haunted by the memory of her kidnapping. She tried to go back to her old life, but the trauma had left its mark. She was never fully able to trust anyone again, and the thought of going on another spring break vacation made her sick to her stomach. The man who had kidnapped her was never caught, and Mia couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, waiting to strike again. She learned a hard lesson that spring break, that danger could lurk around any corner, and that the world was a much darker place than she had ever imagined. The sun was setting over the beach, casting long shadows across the sand as a group of college students settled in for their spring break vacation. They had come to this small island off the coast of Florida, looking for a week of sun, sand, and partying. But as the days wore on, something strange began to happen. It started with little things, a misplaced key, a forgotten phone charger, but soon it escalated into something much more sinister. One of the girls in the group, a quiet and reserved student named Emily, began to have vivid nightmares. She dreamed of dark figures lurking in the shadows, of being chased through dark alleys and deserted streets. She tried to brush it off in stress from school and the excitement of the trip, but the dreams only got worse. As the days went on, the rest of the group began to notice strange things happening as well. Their belongings went missing, only to reappear in strange places. They heard footsteps in the hallway at night, but when they checked, there was no one there. And then one night, they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from Emily's room. They rushed to her door, but found it locked from the inside. They could hear her screaming, begging for help, but they couldn't get in. When they finally broke down the door, they found Emily cowering in the corner, her eyes wild with fear. She told them that something had been in her room, something dark and twisted, with long claws and glowing eyes. It had whispered to her, promising to make her fears disappear if she would only come with it. Emily had refused, and the thing had attacked her, leaving long scratches down her arm. The group tried to comfort her, but they were all feeling the same fear creeping in. They knew that something was wrong with this place, and there was some kind of evil lurking in the shadows. As the days passed, the group became more and more desperate to leave. They tried to book flights home, but all of the flights were canceled due to a mysterious storm that had rolled in. They tried to rent a boat, but the only one available was in terrible condition, with a leaky hull and a faulty engine. With no other options, the group decided to stay and ride out the storm. But as the night wore on, the storm grew more and more intense. The wind howled like a pack of wolves, and the rain pounded against the roof like 1,000 angry fists. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the storm stopped. The sun rose over the island, revealing a landscape that was completely changed. The sand was blackened and charred, the trees were twisted and gnarled, and the once clear waters were murky and dark. The group knew then that they had to leave, that they had to get off this island as fast as they could. They piled into the leaky boat, praying that it would hold together long enough to get them to safety. As they pulled off from the shore, they looked back at the island and saw something that made their blood run cold. In the distance, they could see a figure, dark and twisted, with long claws and glowing eyes. It was watching them, waiting for its next victim to come. And as the group sailed away, they knew that they would never forget the horror that they had experienced on this cursed island. I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural until the spring break trip to Rocky Point changed everything. It was supposed to be the best week of our lives, a time to unwind, party, and forget about the stress of college. But what happened in Rocky Point was far from relaxing or enjoyable. My friends and I arrived at our rented beach house on a sunny afternoon. The house was massive, with an outdoor pool, jacuzzi, and a breathtaking view of the ocean. We couldn't believe our luck in finding such a perfect place to stay. The first 2 days were filled with non-stop drinking, dancing, and swimming. We explored the beach, went parasailing, and rented ATVs to ride throughout the desert. But on the third night, things took a dark turn. It started with strange noises coming from the basement. We were all too drunk to care and laughed it off, thinking it was just the house settling. But as the night went on, the sounds grew louder and more persistent. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When I tried to go to sleep, I couldn't. My mind kept racing, and I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the hallway outside my room. I froze, too scared to move or even breathe. The footsteps grew louder and closer, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, the doorknob turned and the door creaked open. I could see the outline of a figure standing in the doorway, but it was too dark to make out any details. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. The figure stepped into my room, and I could see it was a woman. She was tall, with long dark hair and a flowing white dress. Her face was pale, and her eyes seemed to glow in the dark. I tried to scream to alert my friends, but my throat was tight, and no sound came out. The woman moved closer, and I could feel her breath on my face. It was cold like a winter breeze. I don't remember exactly how I fell asleep, but when I woke up, the woman was gone. My friends laughed when I told them what happened, thinking it was just a nightmare, but then strange things started happening around the house. Doors would slam shut on their own, and we could hear whispers and footsteps in the empty rooms. One night, we decided to play with the Ouija board, thinking it would be fun. But as soon as we started, the planchette moved on its own, spelling out words that made no sense. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and we heard a loud crash coming from the basement. We were too scared to investigate, but the next morning we found the basement door wide open and all the furniture had been overturned. We had seen enough, so we packed our bags and left the beach house that day, too scared to stay another night. To this day, we can't explain what happened in Rocky Point, but I know one thing for sure. I'll never forget that spring break trip, and I'll never be the same. I never thought it would happen to me. I had heard the stories about spring breakers getting their drinks drugged, but I always assumed it was something that happened to other people, not me. I was careful, I was smart, and I never let my guard down. But then, on the third night of my trip to Miami, it happened. I was at the club with my friends, dancing and having a good time, when a guy approached me at the bar. He was tall, dark, and handsome, the kind of guy who made my heart skip a beat. We started talking, and before I knew it, he was buying me a drink. I watched as a bartender poured the drink and handed it to me, and I even took a sip before turning back to the guy. That's the last thing I remember. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a strange room with a pounding headache and a sense of disorientation. My clothes were disheveled, and I knew something wasn't right. I tried to sit up, but my head was spinning, and I couldn't focus. That's when he walked in, the guy from the bar. He was wearing a mask, and I couldn't see his face, but I could sense the evil in his presence. He didn't say anything, but I could tell he had drugged me and brought me to this place. I tried to scream, but my voice was hoarse. I tried to fight, but my limbs were weak. He tied me up and left me there, alone and scared. I don't know how long I was there, but it felt like days. Eventually, I heard a noise outside the door. I didn't know if it was him coming back or someone else, but I knew I had to try to escape. I struggled against the ropes, using all my strength to break free. It took what felt like forever, but I finally managed to get loose. I stumbled out of the room, weak and disoriented. I found myself in an old abandoned warehouse, with no idea where I was or how I had gotten there. I knew I had to get out, but I didn't know where to go. As I stumbled around, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, ready to fight, but it was just a group of guys, my friends. They had been looking for me ever since I disappeared, and they finally had found me because we shared locations with each other. They helped me out of the warehouse and took me to the hospital. The doctor said I had been drugged with a powerful sedative, but I managed to survive. I was lucky, they said. Most people who were drugged like that didn't make it. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt violated, scared, and traumatized. I couldn't trust anyone anymore, not even my friends. The memory of that night would haunt me for the rest of my life. A constant reminder that danger could lurk around any corner, even in the places we thought were safe.